Hello. Oh my God. Hello. Yay. Guten Abend. Thank you for having me. Thank you for staying behind. I realize the pressure of a whole day of listening to people talk on stage as well as beer is a choice you had to make. I'm pleased you made this choice. I'm also really sorry to be kind of futzing around with your schedule. I was kept this morning on the tarmac for 40 minutes because of London fog, which I'm told has nothing to do with Brexit. So, now I'm here. I think I should have a clicker, maybe. Oh, yes. Here we go. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm a product designer. I'm based in London. And over 10 years ago now, I was the first UK distributor of the Arduino. Who knows what the Arduino is? Raise your hands. Excellent. Keep it up. Keep it up if you've actually made something with it. Ooh, when is it? Maybe 10-ish people? Okay, so if you don't know what the Arduino is that thing on the left-hand side, and it's a credit card-sized piece of electronics that's an educational platform, and it's open source hardware, open source software, and you can basically learn how to make anything with electronics within a couple of hours. Even if you've had, obviously this is not the crowd that has not had any programming experience, but if you have no programming experience, then it's really easy to get into. Lots of different versions of it exist now. Lots of compatible versions of this exist, and it's been on the market for over 10 years now, has sold in millions, and it's a really handy way to get into the Internet of Things, which is what I've been concentrating on for 10 years. So I have a consultancy called Designswarm. I have a connected product called the Goodnight Lamp, which I'll talk about. And I also run the Internet of Things meetup in London, which has now been running for 5 years and is the second biggest meetup in the world around this topic. You have one in Berlin, which is run by the lovely Martin Spindler. So I recommend you go if you're interested in this topic and some of the things that I'll talk about. Lots of different clients that I've worked with, a lot of industrial, a lot of not, and that will perhaps color, I guess, the talk that I'll give. And I wanted to talk about the stories that we tell about data and the story that we also tell ourselves about it. The world of the Internet of Things, as I've interacted with it, has been, I think, fraught with a lot of excitement, a lot of hype, and recently a lot of negative press. But I think that there's a lot hidden there that I think we need to discuss and hopefully try to resolve. And I'll start with an example. Who here owns a fitness tracker of some sort? Ooh, Germany. Okay. Well, because, you know, you've got everything else going on for you, so why would you need this? So this is, you know, one of a myriad of fitness trackers that exist. And why do they exist? What's the premise behind why we came up with this? I guess the initial premise was, okay, well, we can track what you do, and that's really useful because maybe we can tell you about your health, we can tell you about your activity or lack thereof, and we can kind of encourage you to do more. And that's sort of seen as the opportunity, the golden goose, and the thing that you use when you're selling this to people and you're encouraging people to sell this. Obviously not so successful here, and but you know, out there in the wide world, you can walk into a shop kind of anywhere, and you'll find one of these on the, you know, sort of hidden usually in a corner because the sales staff don't even know how to sell it, but it's there. I can walk into John Lewis in London and I can find this. But really, the things that we don't talk about, the things that are really front and center, are the fact that these things don't necessarily work very well. The claims that they make are, at best, very dubious. They skirt around issues of what it is that they're there to do. Are they a health product? Are they a medical product? Are they, you know, what's going on? And actually, there's a lot of inaccurate data being produced. And so myriads and myriads and myriads of, you know, bunches of data that are really garbage and that we use as a guide. And so we're using kind of garbage data as a guide for our health, for our well-being, for our activity. And that can be really dangerous. And the slides of this I've posted online already, and I've got references for all these if you're interested. And the other aspect of it, of course, is that we're also encouraging a type of behavior that could be really detrimental to people. The idea of counting things, the idea of gamifying your health and gamifying your activity and kind of tracking everything, keeping track of everything, it's extremely compulsive. And some people have eating disorders that really react to that very negatively. This is an article from the New Republic called Hunger Games, which is a little bit old, it's 2013, but if you go to your local newspaper stand right now, and if you've got an English one nearby, Glamour magazine has an article this month on a woman talking about her health and her bulimia and health issues with her fitness tracker. And so this makes it to Glamour magazine. This is not some tech, print somewhere. It's not, the Verve. It's something very, very prominent and very consumer. And that means that people are really sort of figuring out what the truth is behind these things. And also that we have a very fickle relationship to health. Gyms know this. They always, get our money for the month of January, February, March, and by April we usually have given up on them. And it's the same for wearable devices. You'll get a big spike after Christmas because you've been given one, and then you'll slowly stop using it and go, bah, I don't know, I've got my watch on my phone, what's the point? And so there's a kind of hypocritical sense then when you're gathering data and you're talking about wearable data and you're talking about building services on wearable data that we're really latching onto something that's very much about mimicry. People buy this because other people bought this, they read about this in the newspaper, they've seen people on television buy this, and so it kind of feels cool, it feels like the thing to do. It's not that it makes sense for them and that they'll see results. And research has shown that between someone using a fitness tracker and someone using a paper diary, writing down what they do and writing down what they eat, the person who uses the paper diary actually loses weight, and the person who uses the fitness tracker does not. So, you sort of have to think about that and think about, okay, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about IoT and data then? Another example with the same device, which I think is a little bit more insidious and a little bit more worrying, really, in a way, is fitness trackers for health workers, for people at work, rather, not health workers, people at work. The idea that, and again, this dream, and this is a dream mostly of insurance companies, but the dream is, well, maybe if we track our staff, we can get the best out of them. We can encourage them to be healthy. We can encourage them to walk more, or we can actually make it compulsory. And in some areas, usually in the US for obvious reasons, some businesses are thinking of really making it compulsory for you to use a wearable device and to report your activity. In the UK, there are services that encourage you, shall we say, to go to the gym in order to get a lower premium with your healthcare provider. And what people end up doing is that they'll check into the gym, they'll go and drop something in the locker, and they'll check right back out. But it counts as a piece of data, and that's what we're after, it's data. And so we all know that what your fitness is absolutely not a translation of your ability as an employee, nor should it be. The correlation between the two is very dodgy. If we looked at most, senior managers, I'm pretty sure they, especially in England perhaps, they usually have, a large waistline and huff and puff when they walk up the stairs. But these are the people who are in charge of those businesses because they have experience that's not linked to their physical well-being. And that's okay, and that's perfectly correct. If you've got, let's say, an illness that affects you in some ways but absolutely does not affect you as a knowledge worker, you shouldn't really be in a situation where the National Health Service or anybody like that communicates that data to your employee, or your employer rather, and then sort of punishes you for this. Because, you could be affected in some ways, but actually not really affected in your day-to-day job. The best example I can find is my own father, who had 2 heart attacks and prostate cancer for all the years of his work life. And he had it until he retired, and that was that. He did a great job. He worked in civil engineering. Nobody blinked an eyelid. It didn't matter because he didn't say anything. And his ability to lie about this was really important, because there had to be that separation, in a way, of state and church between the data that sits on one end and the data that sits on the other end. And the hypocritical aspect of this is, of course, that the people coming up with these solutions or coming up with these ideas are usually much older and think, well, we've got to make our business more efficient. And actually, we know that youth does not necessarily equate more efficient, productive people. They tend to burn out more quickly, they tend to have a relationship to work that's unhealthy, and businesses know that and take advantage of that. This is also something that I think is really important to talk about, and I don't think we talk about it in those terms, and I certainly have not really heard very many people talk about it in those terms in my industry. But the idea of the connected home is really appealing. There's something kind of cool about it. There's something kind of shiny about it. And I actually think it's a really interesting and dangerous space in a way, and not because I don't operate in that space, because I like the myth of it. But really what we're also doing is kind of making people compulsively shop all the time. So Amazon's very good at this. You'll buy something that will help you buy other things really quickly. And so that sort of half second that you would normally need to take to pull out your card in a shop and make a decision as to whether you're buying this thing or not. No, you're just walking past the corridor, you're in your underwear, you push a button, job done. You don't even need to think about the act of buying things. And that's really powerful and really dangerous and really interesting. And so, we're collecting data about how people shop in ways that they've never shopped before and probably should never shop at all. Probably there's a psychological space there that we're filling with e-commerce propositions that shouldn't necessarily be there. Because we spend too much money on lots of random shit all the time. Excuse the language. Even the head of sustainability of IKEA said that we had reached peak stuff. I mean, this is IKEA we're talking about. These are the people who are really good at selling us things. And when even they publicly recognize that maybe, yep, that's it, we're done, it's intriguing. And what I think is even more intriguing is that divide between the data we're able to collect about how people buy things and the data that obviously the banking sector has about how we buy things and how much we buy things. And I find it funny that there isn't a sort of, add-on or a pop-up somewhere every time I'm about to buy something with HSBC telling me, are you really sure about this? Because we can tell this is not going to be a good month for you. And there isn't. They sort of sell me that as a sort of byproduct somewhere else. There'll be an app that they can sell me that sort of helps me budget. But, they don't really want to help me because they're getting fees. They're very happy. I go into overdraft. Everybody's happy. And that's the hypocrisy of it, I think. And it extends into the people we love. And the people we love sometimes are not very healthy. And don't do particularly well, but we'd like to think about caring for them in some way. And so we automatically think, okay, well, grandma's on her own and not doing very well. What should we do? I know, we'll buy some tracking devices for her home. And we'll buy, something under the bed to let us know if she falls off the bed in the middle of the night, or we'll buy something she can wear so that she can, if she falls, she can press a button and have some support. And so grandma lives in an environment that's really, really hyper-energetically involved, and lots of things are being sort of managed for her, but not necessarily with her. And at the end of the day, she's still on her own. This was a terrifying quote from research. When your pet and your TV are your companions, you've got problems. And this is not because these people have no family. A particular percentage of over 65 years old does not see a family member more than once a month. And so if their spouse or their partner has died, they're on their own quite a lot. And that will produce problems that are more expensive than the cost of sending an ambulance over when that person falls. It'll be depression, isolation. It'll incur a huge amount of cost long-term that we simply don't necessarily think about when we think about solving the problem of grandma alone at home. We think of the problem of solving the problem of me being able to manage grandma and monitor grandma, not me necessarily being able to care for grandma. And the hypocrisy is that we know we should be seeing grandma more and we simply don't. It's a fun talk, right? And then in the Internet of Things, you can't talk about the Internet of Things. You can't swing a cat before hitting smart cities. And so, number one problem with smart cities has always been and will always be transport. I've just finished a big piece of research for Nominet looking at over 140 smart projects and smart city projects. And it's always about transport. It's always about traffic. We've got such a problem with traffic. Always a problem with traffic. Where it is, when it is, how many people, how many cyclists, how many this, that, and the other. And really, when you really look at it, chances are your public transportation is awful. And you have too many cars. And that is it. You can put sensors everywhere. And I feel bad saying this in Germany, but you can put sensors in every tunnel, in every car, in every bus, on every cyclist. It's still the same equation, the same solution is there. And you have to think about, well, why are we, ambivalent about this? Why do we not just sort of, suddenly offer free transport everywhere forever and, transport to your door if you're ill, or just let's subsidize the hell out of this. And no. It's not good. It's not good because really ultimately, and you can look at the news this morning, our wonderful new Prime Minister announced that Nissan was not going to move its factories outside of the UK. It was going to stay, and it was going to stay because there were some incentives. Because GDP looks really, really cool when you are manufacturing cars. It looks awesome because you're using all these materials and you're manufacturing and offering jobs, thousands and thousands of jobs. And so it doesn't matter how the car is powered, who's driving it or not driving it. Let's just make some metal boxes on wheels. And let's just keep making metal boxes on wheels. And so smart city solutions are great, except when you think about it, it's really an economic choice you're making, and trade agreements you're making, and a decision about what constitutes GDP and success. So what do you do with that? Where do you go with that? And certainly, what kind of data is interesting data? What kind of data is maybe data that's a little bit tricky and a little bit weird, but could offer more possibilities? This is a theory of mine, and I very much welcome your kind of comments or sort of feedback on Twitter or anything else after I'm done. But I think that there's a space for really interesting, small, obtuse data. And data that is relevant to a very small amount of parties, let's say, if at all. If sometimes it's kind of just the one person. But might be interesting. And I've explored that with the Goodnight lamp. And the Goodnight lamp I make in the UK, it's a family of lamps. You give little lamps to anybody around the world, and when you turn the big lamp on, the little ones turn on. So if you have a family member in a different time zone, you want to let them know that now's a good time for a chat, you're available right now, you're thinking about them, you love them, you're just reading before going to bed, you want to let them know that you're okay. It's just the simplest minimum viable presence. And the fun thing about it is, from a data perspective, it means nothing. It's on, off. But from a family perspective, it means a huge amount because you've essentially built a language for that behavior. And it's a language that is, completely agreed amongst yourselves, and it doesn't need to sit anywhere else. It doesn't need to be vocalized. It doesn't need to be written down. It's completely between you. And I think there's something interesting there. The other areas where that kind of presents itself is, again, in kind of small, meaningless, or what we think of as meaningless technologies or meaningless information and data. Hello Lamppost is a project that has now been rolled into the Olympic Park in London, and it's a project that essentially gives an ID to a lot of different parts of the city. Lampposts, benches, bins, whatever. And you can text that number, whatever ID number it is, and you can have a conversation with it. And, Chatbot 101 is a sort of interaction, but there's something interesting there because it makes the act of saying, actually, this lamppost is, really problematic. It really kind of flickers at night, and it's really creepy, and it really creeps me out when I go home. I'm just going to chat in a text environment with this thing and go, hey, what's the problem? And they go, what do you mean? You're having problems. Oh, okay, cool. I'll send someone over. That's a very different interaction than, would you like to please email your local council, and we will get back to you within 24 hours with your request. Thank you very much. The other one is Flood Network. Flood Network is essentially sensors underneath bridges. And so you can tell when it's going to flood in your area. The only bridge you will ever care about is the one right next to your house. That's it. You don't care about the rest of the bridges. You don't care about what happens, 4 kilometers down the river. It's really just you and your house and that bridge. And if that bridge sees an increase, you might get a text message, you might get a warning, something might happen. But it's sort of discreet, and it's kind of up to you to decide, actually, you know what, for insurance purposes, I'll just let my house flood. Or not. And again, it's kind of up to you, and it's kind of meaningless. It's like, oh, okay, well, 20 centimeters more, okay. And, shit, okay, I've got a shed, which means that the shed is down next to the river. Okay, that's going to be a problem, but right now it's okay. Or somewhere else, well, maybe I'll wait a couple of hours and see how it goes. So what I'm saying is not necessarily that the Internet of Things is sort of only good for that infrastructural piece at all. I think what I'm saying, well, I know what I'm saying because I'm saying it. What I'm saying is that people being involved in a decision-making process around kind of dumb data is quite nice because it gives people control. It gives people power to make decisions. And I know that this sort of flies in the face of a lot of the AI conversations that you've been having here, but I think there's something there. This is also an invitation. This is a way in which I'm sort of exploring this, an invitation for you to consider this as an example of this. This is a project I've been working on called the Data Brick. And the Data Brick is, imagine if there was brick in your home with a USB adapter, and that brick was literally in the wall, and that brick kept a certain amount of data about your house. You might be owning, you might be renting, but it will keep some stuff that is currently just stuck in folders or in pieces of paper that will burn if you have a fire, and that's just generally a little bit loose or a little bit unavailable. It might be plans of your house, it might be how to plug kind of things in when you're doing some electrical works, it might be what number the boiler is or how to fix it. It might be all the plumbers and all the fixers that have ever been called to the house and have done a particular job and when they did it. But it's information that's collectively useful, not in the grand scheme of collectiveness, not for everyone, not on Facebook, but for everyone who lives in the house right now and everyone who has probably been through the house at some stage. And it means that you also can leave with some stuff. You can bring some things in, it gets anonymized, and that data kind of sits there quietly, like your energy consumption. It'd be nice if you walked into a new flat and you sort of got a sense of how much it costs to warm that flat. You didn't care who it was from, but you want to know how much you're going to have to budget for. And right now, there's no way of knowing, really. But you want to leave, when you sell, when you move, you want to leave with the stuff that really matters to you. And the stuff that really matters to you has nothing to do with how the boiler works. It's got to do with everything else. And that's where I think, this idea of sort of small, discrete, interesting information just for you and just for a community of people that you basically have never met. Probably, especially if you buy. If you buy in England, it's even worse. I mean, you might exchange keys with the person once. That's it. That's all the information you'll ever have. And maybe you get that dusty folder somewhere. So things for you to think about, I guess, if you're really working with IoT, you're working with physical devices, you're working with the kind of hard bit of IoT, figuring out what's going on and how you can make things that are useful for people, is just to go a little bit beyond that, well, we'll just do advertising revenue, and well, we'll just sell the data off to someone. Because you might be enabling behaviors that are really toxic for people. And you also might be telling absolute lies about what they can do with those products and how they should be sort of engaging with your product. And thinking about the small and the local, I think, is really nice. It's really challenging because then you really have to think about what the user experience is. You can't get away from it. You can't just sort of write people off as, oh, yes, the user. They're people. They're us. With computers going, well, I don't understand why my thermostat is not talking to the rest of the thing, and you've got to think about those people. Because I think that ultimately, the data is a slave, especially in the IoT. This does not apply to many areas of data, but in IoT, the data is a slave to the use, and the use is a slave to the experience, and the experience is a slave to culture. And to trends, and to what my friends are doing or not, and why I'm buying this or not. And all these connections we have to be aware of and we have to work with, while keeping in mind that, data is data, but obviously can't eat data. And so with that, I thank you for your time. I thank you for coming, and even if you had beer, and thank you for having me.